Pues bueno, no hace falta que presente al señor Phil Tippett, el gran maestro de la animación, stop motion, efectos especiales, o sea que os dejo inmediatamente la palabra para que podáis empezar a interrogarle.
I would like to know how it was your work back and then, the difference when you were working in stop motion and now the last years as a supervisor, special effects supervisor. How's the difference? How's your work day by day, etc.?
Well, when I started out, and the first job I got with George Lucas was on the chess set in Star Wars. And that led to a relationship of doing stop motion animation, which is moving a model one frame at a time. And with that, you get a certain kind of a movement and a feeling that might be characterized as a little bit staccato. And then on Jurassic Park, everything changed. And when I was doing stop motion, there couldn't have been more than like a dozen practitioners that were any good. And so on Jurassic Park, when everything went digital, there were many people that were able to, create movement and characters digitally. And I am a complete imbecile when it comes to anything technical or technological. I mean, in the camera days, I'm like very analog in terms of how my mind works, but when it comes to digital stuff, it's like, I can't do it. But luckily for me, on Jurassic Park, I got kicked upstairs because ever since a young age, I studied dinosaurs, so I knew dinosaurs, I knew pre-production, production, and post-production. So I was like the ideal candidate to, move on to become a supervisor. And so that was a big turning point in my life.
La pregunta és com ha canviat la feina des que vas començar a treballar amb stop motion fins als últims treballs que has fet amb els efectes especials com a supervisor. I la resposta ha estat, la meva primera feina va ser amb el George Lucas al set i llavors treballàvem amb stop motion, que es fan les tomes i llavors es fa un moviment per toma. Era com un staccato a música. A Jurassic Park tot va canviar perquè amb el stop motion potser hi havia 12 persones especialistes que eren molt bones, però amb els efectes digitals hi havia moltes persones molt bones treballant que podien crear moviment i personatges digitalment. Jo em considero un total imbècil tecnològicament parlant, és a dir, la meva ment treballa analògicament i per tant no domino el que és la tecnologia. Però per sort a Jurassic Park vaig tenir aquest ascens perquè havia treballat a preproducció, producció i postproducció. I a més de petit m'havien agradat molt els dinosaures i havia estudiat una mica sobre ells també. Així que em van promoure a supervisor.
A raíz de lo que estás ahora respondiendo, el primer parque jurásico de Spielberg revolucionó todo lo que es el tema de los efectos especiales. Entonces, estás diciendo que fue por la tecnología, el salto tecnológico, por el mayor presupuesto, o influyeron otros factores?
It was because nobody had ever seen anything like it. And that's what you want to do as a filmmaker, particularly in this genre of fantasy, science fiction. And that's what inspired me as I was a child with 1933 O'Brien's work on King Kong, and then The Seven Voyages of Sinbad in 1958. And as a child, I recognized the value of spectacle. And ever since, I've chased trying to do something that I or anybody else had never seen before. That was my objective. And for the most part, that's articulated in the script and by talking with the director. So it's not mine. I'm operating more as a choreographer, an interpreter of the director's vision. There was an artist in LA, the name escapes me, but in an interview he was asked, what is the difference between art and craft? And his answer was, a craftsman knows what they're doing and an artist does not. So within that context, as I worked all of what I would call my day job, working for Lucas and Spielberg and Verhoeven and whoever, I saw myself as a choreographer, and in some ways, like Paul and Steven said, I was like an uncredited co-director because I knew like the secret alchemy that they didn't quite understand. And although I didn't understand, digital, or nor did I have any interest in learning anything about it. I'm dyslexic. I can't do anything on a computer, and it was like, I was like, that ain't no job for a man. And, but yeah, so I got kicked upstairs, and from that point, was a supervisor.
Pues yo creo que el secreto, el factor principal fue que no se había hecho nada igual hasta ese momento. Y es lo que un cineasta quiere hacer, algo que no se haya visto anteriormente, sobre todo en el género de la fantasía y de la ciencia ficción. Cuando era niño vi las películas, la de King Kong, rodada en 1933, y la del séptimo viaje de Sinbad en 1958, y como niño me di cuenta del valor del espectáculo, y este ha sido mi objetivo, el escoger siempre proyectos o hacer cosas que nadie haya visto antes. Además de la figura del guionista y del director, yo me considero más como un coreógrafo. Lo que hago es interpretar la visión del director. No me acuerdo a qué artista le preguntaron cuál era la diferencia entre el arte y el craft, exacto, la artesanía. Y él dijo que la diferencia era que un artesano sabe lo que está haciendo y un artista no. Entonces, bueno, después de trabajar con directores como Lucas, Spielberg o Verhoeven, yo me considero, como he dicho, un coreógrafo. Nunca se me ha considerado como un codirector, pero podría decir que esa ha sido mi labor, porque al trabajar con ellos yo sabía cuál era esta alquimia secreta. Y en cuanto a la tecnología, como he dicho, soy disléxico, así que cuando me pongo delante de un ordenador no sé ni por dónde empezar. Así que tuve suerte, en este caso, de que en esta época, en la época de los efectos digitales, se me ascendiera a supervisor.
So in the 70s, in order to escape the draft in the United States, you could get a college deferment. And I went to UC Irvine right at the beginning of conceptual art. And when I was introduced to that opened up huge new worlds for me, in that an artist was no more bound to the traditional materials, sculpture, paint, weaving, whatever. And it was the idea that was important. And what you do with an idea, you have to find its form. And its form can take many different configurations. And so I was very, very influenced by ideas. And I think that's where my value was with these other, productions, was I was like an idea guy. I always come up with ideas and say, what about this? What about that? I don't know. And, they could take it or leave it, but ideas were always welcome. That's what directors want, is like feedback all the time so they can give choices. So that period of time was, I always started with a concept. for the Rancor pit monster in Jedi, my idea was a cross between a bear and a potato, and that's all I needed to orbit. And then designing Jabba the Hutt, Ralph McQuarrie and Joe Johnston and I were designing Jabba, and George rejected everything that we had done. And so I asked him, if he could choose any actor to play Jabba, who would that be? And he thought for a moment, and he said, Sidney Greenstreet. And for those of you who don't know Sidney Greenstreet, he was a very famous actor in Casablanca and a number of movies in the 30s and the 40s. He was like this really big guy. And as soon as George said that, it was like, ding, the light went off in my head because I completely understood the character. And that allowed me to do the design that George chose.
Tengo que añadir que en los años 70, para escaparme de que me reclutaran en los Estados Unidos, me apunté a la Universidad de California en Irvine, en arte conceptual. Y esto abrió muchísimas posibilidades y visiones enormes del mundo para mí. Creo que lo principal, lo más importante es la idea, y a partir de aquí, ¿qué es lo que haces con esa idea? ¿Qué forma le das? ¿Qué diferentes configuraciones le puedes dar a una idea? Y eso es lo que más me ha influenciado, estas ideas. Yo creo que este es mi valor, que cuando tengo una idea, luego pienso qué es lo que puedo hacer con ella. Y esto es lo que quieren los directores, que les des ideas para que ellos luego puedan tener opciones y poder escoger. En aquel periodo de tiempo, en esa época, en los 70, como digo, siempre empezaba con un concepto. Por ejemplo, para crear este personaje en el retorno del Jedi, what was the first character? A bear and a potato?
The Rancor pit monster.
Sí, el Rancor pit, el monstruo Rancor pit. Pensé, lo que me vino a la cabeza fue una mezcla entre un osito y una patata. Por ejemplo, para crear a Jabba el Hutt, con mis compañeros, con Johnston, creamos un personaje, se lo mostramos a George Lucas y él no le gustaba nada de lo que habíamos hecho hasta ese momento. Entonces le pregunté, ¿y qué actor escogerías para representar a este personaje? Y él me dijo Sidney Greenstreet, que es un actor quizás no muy conocido, pero era bastante famoso, salió en Casablanca y en otras producciones de los años 30, 40, y era muy grande. Así que cuando George me dijo esto, me vino la idea a la cabeza y entendí qué es lo que él quería y entonces logré diseñar el personaje que él quería.
¿Qué impacto cree que tendrá la inteligencia artificial en los efectos especiales?
It will be transformative. Everything will change. Everything changes with technology, and it's incumbent upon craftsmen and artists to explore, at least explore the new technology. And from my perspective, my analogy is if I was a violin player, back in history, and someone offered me the opportunity to play the first Stradivarius, that was an opportunity I couldn't refuse. I just had to know what, as an artist, it could give me and how I could integrate it into whatever it is I do. So I'm very excited about the aspect of artificial intelligence in cinema, and but not excited about them taking over the world and killing mankind brutally.
Pues creo que va a ser transformador, o sea, va a transformarlo todo va a cambiar. Para los artesanos, los artistas, pues van a tener que explorar estas nuevas tecnologías. Yo creo que es una oportunidad que nadie puede rechazar, que hay que integrarla en todo caso. Y yo personalmente me siento muy emocionada de ver qué es lo que puede hacer la inteligencia artificial en el cine. No me emociona tanto el pensar que las máquinas pueden tomar el mundo y acabar con toda la humanidad. puede ser divertido, pero...
So I was visiting my daughter, who's an artist in New York, and she had the chat GPT, and so I wanted to see what it could do, and so she set me up, and I asked it to write me a science fiction scene as Kafka would write it, and it was brilliant. You know, it was one paragraph, and it was like, God, this fucking robot hit the nail right on the head. And then I went like, okay, try this. And so I asked it to do a scene between Rupert Murdoch and Tom Sawyer. And it got Murdoch perfectly. But it didn't quite know who Tom Sawyer was. You know, it hadn't, you know, it was like, well, here's Murdoch and there's Tom Sawyer, and I think he had got people to paint a picket fence and went down the river on a raft. And that was, yeah, about it. So that was very amusing.
Hace un tiempo estaba con mi hija en Nueva York, ella es artista, y estábamos hablando de este chat GPT. Y le pregunté qué es lo que podía hacer. Y entonces me dijo, pregúntale, dile que haga algo. Entonces le dije que escribiera una escena de ciencia ficción según Kafka. Y la verdad es que escribió un párrafo, la maldita máquina, que era brillante. Así que luego le pregunté si podía crear una escena entre Rupert Murdoch y Tom Sawyer. Y bueno, parece que la máquina sabía muy bien quién era Murdoch, pero no tanto quién era Tom Sawyer. Y parece que los había puesto a uno aquí y al otro aquí abajo, no había una distancia enorme, y creó esta escena de Tom Sawyer en la que están en el río, en esta balsa. Bueno, era divertido, el resultado fue divertido, la verdad.
So that's what the first thing I would do with anything. I would try and break it. And, you know, most people, what they do is they operate by the rules, but what you want to know what the limitations are. And I rely on mistakes a great deal, because mistakes really tell you things. They either tell you what you can't do, or they can open doors to things that you had never thought of.
Y es lo primero que hice fue eso, intentar pues romper la máquina, digamos, ¿no? La mayoría de personas lo que hacen es actuar o seguir las reglas, pero a mí me gusta ver dónde están los límites, qué limitaciones hay y qué errores, porque los errores al final lo que hacen es decirte qué es lo que se puede hacer y qué margen de maniobra o qué otras posibilidades pueden existir.
Could you please tell us a bit more about your upcoming project, which I believe is called Pekin's Pentaquin? I saw you've completed 800 storyboards, so can you expect this at Sitges in the next years?
Yeah, so that was an idea that I'd come up with. It was kind of when COVID hit, you know, for years before. It takes me forever to come up with something. It takes me years. I'll get like this vision, as I explained yesterday. It's kind of like, it's literally like a cosmic vision or vision from God. And it's like a magnet that the possibilities and potentialities are out here like pieces of iron, but you have to wait, you know, for them to, you know, come together and coalesce into the thing. And let's see, I got lost in my own thought. Could you repeat the question?
About this new project, which is called...
Oh, Penguin. Right. So I had that idea, and I was writing the script. I wrote a screenplay with all the, and over COVID, I sculpted 30 characters for the project. And then I put those into Photoshop and did like pieces of key art, like 50 pieces of key art. And so I know exactly what I want to do, but it was really the antipode to Mad God, which drove me insane. And so I needed to do something that was different and lighter. And so that's what, you know, Pequin, the idea that I orbited that it was something like, but not quite, a 1940s Warner Brothers cartoon, Tex Avery-ish. And I knew Tex Avery. I worked with him at a Cascade Pictures of California, which was a commercial house where I first got started, and Tex was working there in the animation department. So that was like a big, change. I always chased mentors, and Tex was like, I would ask him how would you do this and how would you do that, because I didn't know, and so he was a big influence on Pequin. And Pequin is like this little character. He's a shapeshifter, and his adventure begins with him going on vacation. And he begins as like kind of a sock puppet, a disembodied thing, and then he can change into anything he wants to with a costume. So he puts on these different things and becomes the character that we know in the script. And then in certain stations along the way, he's either cajoled into turning into something else, or he changes into something else to like delight children or something like that.
Sí, la pregunta era sobre el proyecto nuevo en el que está trabajando, si cree que en los próximos años podrá venir a Sitges con este proyecto. El título es Pequin.
Pequin.
Thank you. La respuesta ha sido que es una idea que se me ocurrió durante el COVID, y lo que me pasa es que cuando tengo una idea luego tardo muchísimo tiempo en ponerla en práctica. Así que tenía esta especie de visión cósmica, casi como de Dios, y en la que se podía, es como un imán que puede abrir muchas posibilidades, como si tienes trocitos de hierro y entonces este imán los junta todos. Así es que tenía esta idea, escribí el guión, hice unas 30 personajes que esculpí, luego llegué a tener unas 50 piezas, y en este caso sí que sabía exactamente lo que estaba haciendo, aunque no era todo lo contrario que me sucedió con Mad God, que me volvió casi loco. En el caso de este nuevo proyecto es algo diferente, es más ligero, y es una idea. La idea surgió de querer hacer como una especie de dibujos animados de los de la Warner Bros. En los 40, por ejemplo. Entonces trabajé con Tex, sorry the name.
Avery, A-V-R-E-Y.
Con Tex Avery en California. Él estaba en el departamento de animación y le consultaba muchísimo sobre cómo hacía ciertas cosas, cómo haces esto, cómo haces lo otro, y ha sido como un mentor para mí y ha tenido una gran influencia en este personaje de este nuevo proyecto. La aventura del personaje empieza en que se va de vacaciones, y entonces básicamente al principio es una marioneta casi sin caracterización, y conforme va cambiando y se va desarrollando la aventura y la historia, pues va cambiando de traje y se convierte en el personaje que conoceremos. Así que bueno, están habiendo diferentes etapas en este personaje para convertirse en lo que se va a convertir al final.
I would always seek out mentors, for my education. My education in terms of stop motion, and there were no schools or periodicals that even mentioned a great deal of this stuff. So by default, I needed to go to the places, and tap into the brains of the masters. And one day, Tex and I were sitting outside one of the stages at Cascade Pictures, smoking cigarettes, and I asked him, I was probably in my really early 20s, barely out of my teens, and I asked him if he could show me how to work what they call at the time a dummy sheet, an animation sheet that has all of the frame numbers and then dialogue, and then for animation directors. They would do like little sketches and poses. And so he wrote in the dialogue thing, "Hey, what's up, Doc?" And then he wrote drew like little vowel sounds, for each of the syllables in the dialogue. And then he drew a picture of like Bugs Bunny, doing like whatever, and key poses. And I went like, Tex, could you sign this for me? And he goes like, sure. And he signed it to my good friend Phil, Tex Avery. And so I still have that framed, on my wall in the studio.
Siempre he buscado mentores para mi propia formación. Cuando inicié con el stop motion, no había escuelas a las que recurrir, entonces pues no había ningún lugar, con lo cual iba a buscar a estos maestros de la animación de la época. Uno de ellos es Tex. Me acuerdo que yo debía de tener apenas unos 20 años, fumando un cigarrillo. Le pregunté, le pedí que me enseñara todo sobre cómo hacer una hoja de animación, que le llamamos animation sheet, en la que están las tomas, los diálogos. Es la hoja de animación de los directores de las películas, y vi que él anotaba cosas al lado del diálogo, hacía dibujos, por ejemplo, de Bugs Bunny, o hacía referencias a las pausas, por ejemplo, y le pedí si me lo podía firmar y me dijo que sí, y aún lo tengo guardado.
How many people in this room know Tex Avery, know who he is? Oh, good for you. Yeah, so he was really influential in that, if you know his work, it was very different from Bob Clampett and Chuck Jones. Tex was always like way out there, and so his characters, like if the wolf saw a knockout babe, his eyes would go out, and there'd be a klaxon horn that goes, "Auga." And so, that was more the kind of thing. I didn't care for most cartoons as a kid, but I did like Tex Avery stuff and Max Fleischer's work, the Popeye stuff. I thought everything that was kind of out there or oblique, and that had like, if not a subtext, an overt, sense of very wacky humor. It didn't follow any like real traditional lines. And the thing to understand about these guys was they were inventors. And although, animation had been, honed over the years, it got to a place where you could really, characterize certain people as masters. And that was really important, to go out and find mentors. Oh, and as an anecdote, this will probably not show up in anything that you write, but so these guys were gag men that came off of newspapers. Tex was a Texan, and he was the epitome of a Texan, heavy accent. And as gag men, for their own amusement, they would do things like in LA, there's a road called Mulholland Drive that you can go that overlooks the city of Los Angeles. And they would get a car with like a rumble seat, and that was a seat that was in the back that a couple of people could sit in. And they went to the costume department and got a mannequin of a woman and dressed her up. And one of them would sit in the back seat and pretend like he was kissing this woman. And when the car came up behind them, they would take the mannequin and go dump it in the road. And the cars would like veer off, and it's like a steep cliff. Anyway, they thought that was funny. And then there was this guy, They did all sorts of things, and some of them I used too when I hated somebody. They would, if there was a producer that they didn't like, he would get an anchovy and thumbtack it under their desks, and then the anchovy would rot, and then the office would be, evacuated. They got rid of this guy. And there was another animator or producer that they hated, and every day he was very like a martinet and unctuous. And he would march down to the soft drink machine, which, back in the day, you'd put a nickel in, and you had to snake your drink through this maze, and you pop it out. And he would pop it out and, pop the top off and go, glug, 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 glug. And so what they did was they went in and they put their money in, and it was 7-Up that this guy drank. And they sneaked it out and carefully took the top of the bottle off, poured out the 7-Up, poured in straight vodka, put the tap back on, and snuck it out so it would be the first one there. And this guy comes down, and they just lived this, and they were gag men. They were always coming up with gags and what ifs, and and Tex was one of the wildest, but it was in their hearts.
No sé cuántos de vosotros conocéis a Tex, pero ha sido muy influyente en nuestro trabajo, junto con Jones y otros compañeros. Siempre, no sé si conocéis algunos de sus trabajos, pero hizo el lobo del que se le salían los ojos, y eran cosas que a mí de pequeño, cuando veía los dibujos animados, me gustaban. Tenían un humor que no era para nada tradicional, y lo que eran en realidad estas personas eran inventores. Lo que hacían con la animación era caracterizar a los personajes, y eran realmente maestros. Así que Tex es muy importante para mi carrera. Simplemente comentar algunas anécdotas de ellos, quizás no sé si deberían de salir en los comunicados, en vuestras noticias de prensa, pero eran verdaderos gags, hacían gags ellos mismos, hacían bromas. Tex era la epitomía del tejano, la forma de hablar que tenía, y hacían estas bromas simplemente para pasárselo bien ellos mismos. En Los Ángeles está esta zona, Mulholland Drive, en la que se tiene una vista de toda Los Ángeles, y iban hasta allí con sus coches. En el asiento trasero ponían a maniquís vestidos de mujeres y hacían ver que las besaban, y de repente abrían la puerta y las tiraban a la carretera. Entonces, claro, los coches que venían detrás las tenían que esquivar, en fin, les parecía divertido a ellos. Por ejemplo, otra anécdota tenían esta broma, sobre todo a productores a los que odiaban, no les caían muy bien. A uno de ellos le pusieron en su despacho una anchoa que estaba podrida, y entonces casi tuvieron que evacuar las oficinas por la peste que hacía. A otro productor que tampoco les caía muy bien, una persona muy ansiosa, y siempre iba a la máquina de bebidas, sacaba una bebida y se la bebía casi de un trago. Lo que hicieron fue ir por escondidos, sacar la tapa de la bebida, vaciarla, volverla a poner, y entonces cuando el tío bebía, se daba el susto de muerte, ¿no? Entonces eran esta especie de hombres que hacían estos gags, estas bromas, y Tex desde luego era como el más salvaje de todos ellos.
You were talking about mentors, and then you became a master in your work. It's not a compliment, it's a fact. I wonder, I'm positive all the filmmakers that you work with learn from you, but I wonder if they had any kind of impact on your formation, especially as a filmmaker when you were working in Mad Cut.
Paul Verhoeven was definitely, the biggest influence, and started off as a mentor and a friend. I was an admirer of all of his movies, prior to RoboCop. And Paul and I shared the same worldview, and philosophy, and we would have talks, and we characterized ourselves as existential Buddhists, and so he was pivotal, different from Lucas and Spielberg, who were I would consider commercial artists, because they were always chasing the box office and trying to second guess what the audience would like. They were not really second guessing it. They were the audience, and they were making films for people like themselves that wanted to see something different. And of course, Paul always wanted his films to be different, and was characterized by his kind of manic comic outlook, and so working with him, I could absorb Paul's gestalt, and when you do that, like with text, it just becomes part of you. You want to be like a vampire and suck them dry, and but you do it like most acolytes would do with a mentor or master, and I would do this to certain people in my God that had potential and talent. Is you learn not out of a book, but you learn by experience and just being there and absorbing what's going on. And I'm like I operate primarily from my unconscious, and I really don't think about anything. It's like when asked where my ideas come from, my answer would be the same as like Bach, Beethoven, or Mozart. It was like I just transcribe it. God, who I don't particularly believe in, but it's an apropos analogy, just tells me what to do, and I just automatically do it and don't think.
Sí, la pregunta ha sido, has hablado de tus mentores, pero tengo que decir, no es un cumplido, es un hecho de que tú eres un maestro. Entonces la pregunta es, de todos los cineastas con los que has trabajado, ¿qué han aprendido ellos de ti y cómo les has influido tú? Y la respuesta ha sido, pues, Paul Verhoeven ha sido realmente, cuando empezamos a trabajar era un amigo, un mentor, yo lo admiraba su trabajo, sobre todo Robocop, y porque compartimos la misma visión del mundo, los dos somos la misma visión, la misma filosofía. Hemos tenido muchas charlas y los dos nos definimos como budistas existenciales, y ha sido central, Paul Verhoeven ha sido central en mi trabajo. No es como Lucas o Spielberg, que están más enfocados en lo comercial y en los éxitos de taquilla y en hacer películas para la audiencia que es más o menos como ellos, que quieren ver lo mismo que ellos quieren ver. Paul es diferente. He trabajado con él y al trabajar con él he visto su manera de hacer, su gestalt, ha comentado, igual parecido a Tex. Cuando estoy con ellos me siento como un vampiro que les quiero chupar sus ideas. Son como una especie de acólitos, mentores, maestros. Así que yo creo que puedes aprender de los libros, también puedes aprender de tu propia experiencia, de absorber las cosas. Y cuando se me pregunta, yo digo que yo opero desde el subconsciente. Cuando me preguntan de dónde vienen mis ideas, pues pongo como ejemplo a Bach, Beethoven o Mozart. Parece que Dios me da esas ideas y simplemente lo que hago es transcribirlas. Dios me dice qué es lo que tengo que hacer y lo hago.
And I think the social environment is very important. And by analogy, I would start with Albert Einstein. And he lived at a time when clocks and trains were the center of culture. And the clocks, you generally didn't have watch, but it would be like a big thing in the town square or whatever. And so his observation of relativity was on the train tracks and watching the trains crossing, one going this way and one going that way. And that just sparked the idea, out of nowhere. It was like God just went, and it was like, ah. And it's this, metaphor of the magnet and the orbiting iron particles that for him took years while he was working in a postal office to coagulate into E equals mc square. And so on Jurassic and subsequently right on the heels of Jurassic, Starship Troopers. So Jurassic was like the first big, example of computer graphics. And again, something that nobody had ever seen, but the success of that was a result of myself and Dennis Murin. We were both educated in practical filmmaking, so we knew the mental processes that it took to get, it needs to be like this, it needs to feel like that. And animators on both of those shows, for me, my direction was, it was like, these guys are fucking imbeciles, they knew how to do that. And so what I would do is I would take very simple stop motion armatures and then make, for Jurassic, stop motion puppets, off of, in rubber based off of Stan Winston's maquettes. And I would put them in front of the animators and twist them up and say, here, make it look, give it a good pose. And so it was like, okay, now here's what you do. This is what you have to do, is estimate the center of gravity. And you do that like this. You have to know where the footfall patterns are. You have to know the very simple observation is, we all, or any creature / character, brings in our information from our eyes. And so who do I want? That camera over there with the guy standing up, I see him, that information comes in and it goes back out. And now I'm in a position to react to, in this case, wondering, is this guy a fucking idiot? Or is he a genius? I don't know, so there's a conundrum there immediately. Or if I'm being attacked, I know to do that. So it's a very important performance trope, to use. So Dennis and I knew all of these things, and that is what significantly contributed to how that stuff looked, having come from a practical perspective. And the same thing on Starship Troopers, the guy that I, developed the bugs with, Craig Hayes, had worked with me for years, and so he understood the whole practical aspect of what things looked like in a computer world, what the sheen on something would be, what the texture was from bumps to the most minuscule details, and then after Troopers, this was like Jurassic Troopers, like that, and then the whole craft kind of lost us for a while. We were thinking about other things, and it really went into the toilet in terms of skill and craft, and it was really literally years before skill and talent built its stuff up to what you see today, which is amazing.
También la sociedad que te rodea, el ambiente de la sociedad que te rodea es súper importante. Siempre pienso en esta analogía con Einstein, hago esta analogía. En su época lo más importante eran los relojes y los trenes, ¿no? Era la cultura del reloj. Teníamos estos grandes relojes en las estaciones o en sitios como Times Square. Y él lo que hizo Einstein fue observar los trenes para llegar a esta teoría de la relatividad, cómo se mueven, y esto es lo que dio origen a su idea. Y creo que esto es una metáfora un poco, la metáfora que yo utilizo es este imán en el que hay partículas por todas partes, y entonces este imán las junta a todas, y es así como llegas a una fórmula final. Pero para esto por ejemplo, a él su teoría pues tardó años en llegar a esta teoría. Lo que ha pasado a partir de Parque Jurásico y más tarde es que Parque Jurásico, como primer gran ejemplo de imágenes generadas por ordenador que no se habían visto antes, este fue el gran éxito, pero Dennis, Mirren y yo veníamos de los efectos prácticos, con lo cual sabíamos cuáles eran los movimientos o cómo tenían que verse según qué escenas. Y pensábamos muchas veces que los animadores de ahora o de a partir de entonces que manejan los efectos digitales, pensábamos que eran imbéciles porque no entendían los movimientos más simples del stop motion. Y les enseñábamos con las miniaturas qué es lo que tenían que hacer, esto es lo que hay que hacer para dar la sensación de gravedad, por ejemplo. Y era a partir de unas observaciones muy, muy simples. Creo que toda la información la recogemos con los ojos, ¿no? Por ejemplo, como las cámaras recogen la información con los ojos y luego lo tienen que reflejar, esas imágenes. Para poder, entonces explicábamos cuáles eran los movimientos a partir de nuestra perspectiva de los efectos más prácticos. Eso también pasó en Stormtroopers. Al trabajar el aspecto más práctico de los efectos, pues dábamos más importancia al brillo, la textura, a los detalles más minúsculos. Representa toda una artesanía en la que tienes que tener esta habilidad y este talento que se tenían durante esos años.
Muchas gracias. Thanks so much.